Cavalry's back.
We are no one. We are everyone. We are invisible.
I'm just going to ask you a series of questions. Answer them honestly.
You believe your life is under direct and immediate threat?
I wear the mask to protect myself.
3 years of peace. And we convinced ourselves that they were gone. But they were just hibernating.
And that time is near.
Just the end of the world.
It's only just begun.
Hello and welcome to Who Watches, a podcast covering the HBO series Watchmen.
I'm Travis Fishburn.
I'm Ryan DeVere.
And I am Dustin Meadows.
And welcome to the show.
Probably to lead off, we'll talk about our familiarity with the source material. The first time I remember kind of being introduced to Watchmen, I was actually with you, Dustin, because we were seeing The Dark Knight midnight screening.
Yes, I remember that.
I was dressed as Commissioner Gordon.
I was dressed as Batman. And my my then girlfriend was a very scary looking lady Joker in khaki shorts.
Well then.
Yeah.
Watchmen for me, I mean, I watched the Zack Snyder film. I've not read through the comic. I'm really coming at this pretty much blind. So I'm there's so many questions about this first episode.
Yeah, about the world and
Oh wow, okay.
everything in it. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm pretty well versed in it. I was introduced to it in college, actually, in a popular literature class. It was one of our required texts. So the first time I remember reading it was probably, I think it was fall of 2004 when I was at college with Travis. And it was one of those things, like, the first time I read it, I was blown away. But then, like, I learned what a cantankerous old grouch Alan Moore is. And that kind of, like, tainted it. Like, so every time, like, I read it subsequently, I was like, yeah, some parts of this is cool. And, like, yeah, it did, like, a lot to deconstruct and redefine the genre. But, like, also, man, like, Alan Moore, quit being such a chode. Like, he's so grumpy. And then, of course, the movie came out and a lot of people were divided about it. And I actually, within the last year, I think, me and my fiance, we watched, like, the ultimate, like, 3+ hour cut
With the Black Freighter.
that has the Black Freighter animated sequence in it and everything. And, like, story-wise, there's still a lot of cool things that, like, the comic does. There's a lot of things that, like, the movie kind of gets wrong, like, just, and that's more like because Zack Snyder can't decide whether he wants to stand on his own 2 feet or whether he wants to, like, completely homage the comic, and, like, he seems like he's consistently torn between those two. But, like, that being said, I do think the story, like, there's obviously a reason it's on, like, all of these best of lists and, like, most influential comics of all time lists and everything, and I do think there are a lot of things to be said for it. And when they announced this series, I was fairly indifferent to it. I was like, yeah, sure, I'll check that out. But, like, after seeing this first episode, I am blown away, like, by how into it I was.
Awesome.
So,
Yeah, like my entry point being the 2009 film.
Mm-hmm.
I thought it was cool, but ever since then I've always heard, like, yeah, there's some
Like,
pretty
you don't really know the story.
differences. Yeah, exactly that. And every little tidbit I've gotten from it, from, like, the comics, it's like, oh, this is so fleshed out. This is so so much deeper and so much more. It seemed like there were different statements that they were making in the comic
yeah.
than what Zack Snyder was making with the film.
Mm-hmm.
And, I mean, and even then, like, I think Zack Snyder did about as good a job as you can trying to adapt this property
Into a single film.
Yeah, because, like, I mean, the comic has, like, all those prose segments, like, in between. Like, how do you make a chapter that's the original Night Owl's memoirs or whatever else they threw in between? Like, how do you say it was like, oh, hey, here's pages for, like, the original, like, Minutemen action figures. Like, just all these things that, like, aren't going to translate. But, like, I mean, that being said, like, I don't know if anyone could have done a better job of that movie at that time.
No. Yeah, the original book, I discovered it in fall of 2008. and I found myself rereading it time and again, and it's become like my favorite book. And I was telling you, like, this last year when I was rereading it, Ryan, like, it's so hard to imagine adapting it because it's so meant to be in the form that it is.
Yeah.
you like, because like you said, with all these little prose at the end and everything in all of the panels, how the panels are structured, it's just this like perfect, like, single told story.
Mm-hmm.
And I never read before Watchmen. I never read Doomsday Clock because I was always so invested in just this one story that was told.
Yeah, like, why do you need anything else?
No.
And that's kind of how I was too.
So like when they announced this series, I was like, oh, is it going to be like a 12 episode adaptation? Is that what they're kind of going for? And then I remember seeing a set photo last summer. And it just like got me so excited about the prospect of like, oh, they're not adapting. There's going to be something that takes place in this world, but it takes place after, because they showed a street sign with like a squid on it, like it was a radioactive sign. I'm like, oh, they're going there with this.
Yeah.
So you take something that is kind of, in a lot of people's opinion, like a perfection of form from comics as a medium. You translate it to a movie, right? And there's limitations there. But now we've got an HBO show that's telling a news story in the same universe. It seems like they're going to take time with it. It seems like they're putting thought and energy towards not only just like the writing of it, but the score. They're putting thought towards the cinematography. Do you think that they'll be able to get close?
I mean, I think so. Like, based on this first episode alone, I think a lot of what the book hinges on is its drawing from, like, historical events and, like, American history to inform the narrative. And, like, especially, like, ultimately, like, the final plot point of Ozymandias, like, orchestrating, like, essentially a massive genocide in the first place. And the fact that this episode opens with the Black Wall Street riots in Tulsa from 1921, like, and then like as they go on, it's like, oh, we're going to be talking about racism a lot, and obviously there's a lot like right now in the political spectrum that rings true because of that.
Yeah.
And it's insane to me too. I was researching the Tulsa riots after I watched this episode because that friend of mine had mentioned them the day after the episode premiered, and it's not something that's really taught in history classes.
No.
Like I was reading, like, it took 75 years before the government even put together like essentially a group to kind of like research and document and like interview survivors and people who lived in Tulsa at the time of the riots. And it's like, how bad like has, like, I mean, obviously over the centuries, government has big time failed black people in this country, but like especially in something like that, where just like literally open street wholesale slaughter of black Americans, and like it just is this thing that's kind of historically been swept under the rug, and it makes you think of things like, you know, like with police brutality now and like the unarmed shooting, like so many, like so like obviously right out the gate, the show has something to say.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like
no,
there's a reason that we're seeing what we're seeing at the beginning. There's a reason that's the first thing we see.
No, exactly. And I felt so ignorant once I realized that is something that actually happened in history, because Regina King yesterday had tweeted how many people like came to her and said like, I never was taught about this in school.
Yeah.
Because we know that the world of Watchmen takes place with an alternate history. So when this opens up and it's 1921, I'm like, well, that's before history should be altered in this timeline. Like this seems like a crazy thing to happen. Yep. And it's
like,
it's
oh no,
real.
this really happened. Like this is a page right out of American history. Like, because even stuff like the Tuskegee experiments, like those are at least a little more known. But like this was just like was a blip until the late 90s when they put this commission together to kind of investigate and document it. And it's nuts even now, like, because I mean by that point, like, most of us were either still going through high school or went through college courses, and like still nothing about like that event like taught in anything. Like I literally spent half a year in high school learning about Vietnam, which you know is an important thing to study, but like nobody doesn't know what Vietnam is. Like that's like like we as a country have been recovering from that for decades. Like it's pretty well documented. Like we know what happened with Vietnam, but like this, like you said, like you see this and it's like, oh, this is an alternate history. No, nope. This is real. This happened.
Yeah, just crazy. I think with that we can kind of start breaking down the episode with the beginning,
absolutely.
where we start off with a silent film that depicts Bass Reeves, the Black Marshal of Oklahoma. And we see a little boy watching that silent film with his mother playing was it a piano or?
She was playing the organ to accompany the film. Yeah. Did anybody else think that Bass Reeves was intentionally got up to resemble Hooded Justice in that beginning?
I thought so.
I thought that for a second, but like he didn't have the rope around his neck, which completely makes sense why that character wouldn't wear that. But it definitely, like, the first time I saw it, I was like, oh, okay, this is, like, the original Hooded Justice. And then he throws it off, and it was like, oh, it's Bass Reeves, like a black U.S. Marshal. Cool. Which is also, like, really interesting to see, because for 1921, to see a black character not relegated to, like, a servant role or something like that, especially because, like, that was, 4 or 5 years after Birth of a Nation came out, like, with a very unflattering depiction of Black Americans. So like it's interesting to see like such a positive portrayal right in the beginning as the Tulsa riots are beginning in the street.
And there's a quote from Bass Reeves that the little boy quotes along with him: "There will be no mob justice today. Trust in the law."
Which like literally seconds later we see the law failing the entire city of Tulsa. I think it's the Greenwood district specifically, which were like a lot of the black-owned businesses and residences were. So yeah, that's I missed that, but that's a real interesting juxtaposition to have that character say that, and then it's like literally, oh no, there are people just openly in Klan robes, like unhooded too, like which is crazy. Like that's the one like uncowardly thing that any of the Klan members do is they don't cover their faces in that scene for whatever reason. But like it just, I mean, anytime you see Klan members depicted, like they're almost always hooded because those masks are terrifying. They're scary. Like they're meant to evoke that fear, and then you see all these people like unhooded running around in Klan robes, and it again, I think it kind of sends across that as like these are neighbors, like these are people that probably know each other, who are just like, well, this is what we are, this is what we're doing, and they're open in the streets about it, which makes it that much scarier that they don't feel that need for anonymity, which is that's a whole thing later with the 7th Cavalry, but we'll get to that.
Yeah, so you've got you have the silent film playing, and then you pull back. The mom's playing the organ, right, as accompaniment, and then the guy, the father, presumably, breaks in. He's wearing a uniform. It's a military uniform?
It looks so.
Yeah.
So you have some sort of setup there. Like that's not on accident.
No.
And he's got a weapon as well. And then they exit. Right. There's gunfire. There's all just terror happening in the streets. You've got the plane strafing and everything, which, I mean...
The plane was the big over-the-top thing where I was like, how is this real?
Was it? Do they give a date, or is it just the year?
Just the year.
Because the Tulsa race riots, they lasted like I think like 3 or 4 days. So and like because at one point like the National Guard came in, which makes me wonder if that's what the father character maybe like he was part of that regiment who like specifically like maybe broke off from his group to go save his family. I don't know, but that kind of makes sense a little bit more because it's a couple of years after World War I had ended by that point. And there was also a lot of tension in the job market because returning servicemen were competing for jobs, white and black alike, because they were all coming back and they're just like, all right, we're ready to resume our lives. It's like, there's not enough work for everybody, which was a part of the racial tension that existed there too. So, yeah, it'd be interesting to kind of know what stage in the riots they were at, like when we get jumped in, because a lot happened over those 3 or 4 days.
Well, I mean,
sure. And
I definitely get the feel that we're gonna learn more about what happened.
Oh, for sure, with that character, absolutely.
Oh, yeah. But then kind of everything leads up to them putting the kid in a box.
Yeah, and he wakes up in a field. They're both dead, and he finds what we can presume is their daughter.
Right.
Yeah.
Which that also has heavy implications in like the story. Like that, I feel like that's going to come back into play.
Yeah, it threw me for a second too, because I was like, this is the 20s. Like, even if this is set like in the 80s and not modern day, like that baby's still going to be too old to be our main character.
Uh-huh.
Yeah. How is this relevant? But I don't know. There's
See
a
how
lot to
that plays
cover.
out.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So then we cut to modern day Oklahoma, September of 2019, where a police officer pulls over a man in a pickup, and there's an interaction where we see a police officer with a yellow mask interrogating a man.
I think this scene is like really where we start to get into the juxtaposition of, all right, this seems like this course of this show is going to take place heavily in racial tension and like what's happening, and it really kind of painted that in black and white immediately, because this guy gets pulled over and his reaction is clearly that of like, oh great, this is gonna not go well, and he gets tense, and then the police officer comes and the police officer is tense, and like there's all kinds of stuff happening.
And then the police officer has to go back to his squad car and request the release of his weapon.
Yeah, which, like, this scene is really good because, like, in the space of the 3 minutes or so that we see, like, we learn that the modern police force operates masked, which we later learn is for their anonymity and protection. But, like, we know that for whatever reason, police in this world wear a mask. We know that they have to request permission for the authorization of lethal force. And we also know that we can assume from when we see the Rorschach mask in the glove box, and especially when he calls it in, that there's obviously some kind of movement or symbolism, or like there's some kind of threat attached to that symbol.
So I've got a question as far as the watch, like the original comic goes. You have the Minutemen, which are government sanctioned, right? Post Dr. Manhattan kind of coming onto the scene, they go, okay, we have to do something with vigilantes. Are they?
So I think there was less they were government sanctioned, they just hadn't been outlawed yet.
Yeah.
Okay.
It's pretty much the only government sanctioned ones in the comics is Dr. Manhattan and the comedian who operates essentially, like, I mean, he's not quite a mercenary because he's on their payroll, but like he's essentially like a black ops guy, like the black ops guy. And then like because the Minutemen are still regarded as vigilantes.
Oh, okay.
They haven't been banned outright.
So for me, watching the police officer always got a mask, I wonder if this is a variation of the Minutemen. They've changed and evolved it, but it sounds to me then like this is completely different. This is not necessarily.
Yeah, in
connected.
the world of the comic, in 1977, there was something called the Keene Act, in which superheroes or vigilantes were outlawed, except for Dr. Manhattan and the comedian. So very similar to The Incredibles.
Yep.
Wait a second.
Yeah.
The Incredibles, just the less cynical Watchmen.
So yeah, we see kind of an inverse thing happening here, where the police are picking up those tactics of the masked vigilantes.
Yeah, and clearly that scenario doesn't play out as well as the officer would have hoped. Yeah.
And the nuts thing about it too is like it's a routine traffic stop, and we get the idea that there's going to be more to it. But then after the guy in the truck shoots the officer Charlie, he literally throws a romaine heart through the windshield because he told him he was hauling lettuce. So like this was essentially could have been avoided. Like the cop was just he was suspicious, and he, as far as the Driver was concerned, overreached, I guess.
Yeah.
Which is real interesting to like, because I mean, the cop would have checked the truck, like, could have been nothing played out.
Exactly.
Yeah, which
Had he kept his license and registration somewhere else.
Yeah. or
his
not
Rorschach
so.
mask.
Yeah. It's
or
like,
the Rorschach mask.
Hey,
Anywhere else.
where can I hide this damning evidence? Oh, I don't know, where anyone can find it. There we go.
Perfect. Yeah. So you also then walk away with the sense that this is like this guy wasn't like necessarily up to something. He had a Rorschach mask, but like he was just moving lettuce.
Yeah.
But tensions are already so high that even something as mundane as that turns into this life and death situation.
Yeah. But then of course, as we learn later on, like there's reason to be suspicious of that Rorschach mask.
Yeah.
Which is super interesting because I think this kind of ties to a lot of like what we're seeing with like things like the alt-right movement right now, where people are latching onto these old symbols. And in the case of like the alt-rights, like Nazis were bad. I think we're all in agreement on that. Rorschach in the comics he's not quite there, but he's definitely unhinged. Like even his ideologies, like his perspective, like you're not necessarily meant to be on board with everything that Rorschach thinks and says in the comics. Like he's clearly, like if Rorschach existed today, like he'd listen to Alex Jones. Like he would do those kinds of things. Like it's not as blatant in the comics, but like a lot of his ideals like are very right leaning. Like even though like he is essentially on paper at the end of the day like fighting the bad guy and everything.
Which all stemmed from a hatred of his mother.
Yeah. Which is like, oh boy, oh god, is Rorschach just an incel? Is that what's happening here?
Oh no.
Yeah, there's a lot happening.
Yeah. So it's very interesting to see where things came from Rorschach.
Yeah.
And the journal that he left, which obviously we can assume
Was published.
It was published by the New Frontiersman.
Yeah, which itself a right-leaning publication. So like that's essentially the equivalent of Breitbart being given Rorschach's journal and then using it as a manifesto for them to excuse whatever terrible shit they're doing.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I mean, the show is clearly not gonna pull any punches. Like they're just jumping right in.
HBO for the most part rarely does.
Yeah.
Which is, I think it's good that network is doing it, and I'm glad that they went with this show instead of whatever Denioff and Weiss show. There was like, hey, what if the South won the Civil War?
Oh yeah, because this is very much seems to be, I want to say in the spirit of
like where we've got like this alternate reality, that's only kind of an alternate reality.
Yeah. We move forward into we're introduced to Don Johnson. His character's name is Judd Crawford, watching Oklahoma, where he's informed of Charlie Sutton's shooting.
Specifically, an all-black cast performance of Oklahoma.
Yeah.
You can't.
Which like as soon as I saw that, I was like, this is probably nothing, but like I feel like there's something like important to this. And then the way they talk about it later, it seems like there is.
Yeah. Very interesting that the entirety of the show itself seems to will be taking place in Oklahoma.
Yeah.
Which, when I think of Watchmen, I associate it with Manhattan, New York, and a few other places, Mars.
Yeah.
But Oklahoma is interesting to see everything converge there.
Oh man, you know what? I just thought of this. I wonder if like the casting of Oklahoma, if maybe that's not part of like the Redfordations.
That's
like that they mention later was like part of their reparations under President Redford, which that's a whole thing.
Oh, I was so excited when I could see in the background of that scene, I could see just like this blurred out picture. I'm like, oh, Robert Redford's president.
Yeah.
Because that's hinted at the end of the comic is that he's gonna be running.
But not well, I guess he wasn't president in the MCU. He was just like secretary of something or other. But yeah, it's now that I think about it, I wonder. I feel like that's got to be like part of like the agreement that they made.
Yeah.
There's like, hey, like, you know, more opportunities for black actors, things like that.
Guess we'll see more of that as it progresses.
Yep.
So Crawford meets, well, we're introduced to Tim Blake Nelson.
Yeah.
Playing a character named Looking Glass.
Yep. I didn't realize it was him until the credits started rolling. I was like, who was Tim Blake Nelson? I was like, oh, that was him.
Yeah.
Man, Tim Blake Nelson is fantastic.
Yeah.
Everything I think I've ever seen him in, he's a great presence and continues that here. Like, did you guys watch The Ballad of Buster Scruggs?
Uh-huh.
I have not yet.
Oh,
I need
I love
to.
it.
It's very much worth it.
The last thing that I watched with Tim Blake Nelson was Angel Has Fallen.
Oh, I've not seen any of the Has Fallen movies.
Oh, Olympus Has Fallen is actually very good. London Has Fallen is not. And Angel Has Fallen was way better than I thought it was going to be.
Yeah,
so,
I've heard good things.
So, yeah, 2 out of 3 ain't bad, just like Meatloaf said. But yeah, Tim Blake Nelson was in Angel Has Fallen. That was the last thing I saw him. It's just like, it's always weird because like I feel like I'll see him in one movie where he's great. Like anytime he's with the Coen brothers, he's amazing. Like,
yes.
Oh Brother, Where Art Thou? Phenomenal. Then it's like, hey, what if we have him in The Incredible Hulk? And it's like, oh, you're here. Like, which is very much how Angel Has Fallen was.
Yeah.
Because like it's also like his character just has like very obviously dyed hair, very obviously bad hair plugs.
Oh, interesting.
And then like he's in this, and I was like, oh yeah, no, this is like Tim Blake Nelson's true form, and he's in his element right here. Like just he looks comfortable in this role.
Yeah.
Yeah, but that starts opening. So we get introduced to the police officer. He's got the yellow mask, right?
Yeah.
And then Tim Blake Nelson walks up, and now he's got this really cool reflective mask, which is that's really cool. But
it made me wonder. I didn't think he was a police officer at first,
Right.
because there seems to be a uniform, but from what it looks like,
they're
it's
detectives.
but we
Yeah,
start diverging.
and they get to have their own like
Essentially alter
personalities.
egos.
Yeah, because I took a note of all of them because I watched it with subtitles, and they reveal that there are several names.
Yeah, yeah.
Like he is Looking Glass. There's a Pirate Jenny.
Yep.
And I was like, oh, and that's an obvious reference.
Red Scare was one of the other ones, and then Regina King is what? Sister Abigail?
Knight.
Sister Knight, that's
Yeah.
what it was.
And then we had Panda.
Yeah, Panda, just wearing a panda mask.
So is Panda anything to do with anything else in the Watchmen universe? Is this was just out of left
pretty
field,
much
right?
the only characters directly explicitly tied to the Watchmen comic in this episode is there's that brief news report of the Dr. Manhattan sighting on Mars, and then of course obviously the 7th Cavalry fashioning themselves after the lunatic writings of Rorschach.
Yeah.
So
And Cavalry, I also discovered while watching it with subtitles, spelled with a K.
spelled with a K, which not a coincidence. Which is like, all right, now you're making a clear choice to associate yourself with the Klan. All right.
Yeah.
Really quick, I also, before we move on, I want to say what a great sight gag it is. It took me a second to realize what was happening, but when Don Johnson is in the hospital room, he tells Wade to put his face on, and then he uses the reflective mask to adjust his tie before he heads out. I was like, why is he telling him to put his mask on? Like everybody's seeing it. I was like, oh, because I got it. That's a good bet.
Very nice.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, so then Crawford goes and he visits the
Presumably
officer's
Charlie's
wife.
wife.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Mhm. We're told that it's against the rules to tell anybody your secret identity.
Yeah, that you're a cop.
Yeah, so they have to come up with all of these lies and backstories,
Very
which
elaborate.
I don't know how they keep that up.
Which is weird, like, because usually, I don't know, you would think that they would come up with some kind of, like,
Program.
a front or,
Yeah.
like, a thing. It was, like, maybe, like, oh, they all work for, like, this made-up, like, manufacturing plant
Yeah.
or something. Like, something to cover for it.
Because eventually, like, with Regina King and her bakery that's never going to open. Like,
Yeah. It's really
Just
like,
moved
how
to
much
next thing.
longer till that thing opens?
Yeah, the problem with the company though is like once one guy's cover gets blown, then everybody's done, right? Because
Essentially, if the wrong person finds out about it.
Right.
Yeah, which
Yeah.
that's a good point, too.
But that raises so many questions. I'm curious if they have an answer for it, or if it's just kind of a suspension of disbelief of like, okay, if you're an officer and your mask covers, your face and nose, like, are you just going to avoid people that that would probably just be able to recognize you anyway?
Yeah.
Or is it just kind of it's like a Superman thing.
Yeah,
He's wearing his glasses,
like,
so nobody
far,
knows.
every context we've seen for law enforcement has been like nighttime and like straight up like apprehension of criminals.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I'm sure we'll see more of it as like we're only one episode in, but like, like, are these guys directing traffic in mask?
Yeah,
That's a
like,
good point.
Are they closing off like marathon and parade routes? Like, so it'll be interesting to kind of see.
if you're directing traffic,
No,
how do
that's
you
right.
blow a whistle in a mask?
Yeah, that's true. Maybe they just
See the
have like a
special
boat
whistle
horn.
mask.
Yeah.
Blow a horn.
But I do like too. We get him out like because initially I feel like we're not supposed to be sure whether or not Don Johnson is a likable character, whether or not he's good. But then he has that moment with the officer's wife. She says something.
She
to the
says,
effect of, like, he liked you.
Mm-hmm.
It's like reminding her that he's
He's
still
still
okay.
alive.
That like he's
Mhm.
very much probably gonna come through it. And I was like, okay, so like this guy is not like a cold hard ass. Like, there's compassion here. Like, he's a good character.
Yeah.
Yeah, but that tracks with everything I know about Watchmen. Is like nobody's just good or bad. There's all kinds
Oh
of
yeah,
just
there's a lot of
different
moral
degrees of it.
ambiguity, a lot of moral flexibility.
My expectation, I think, where the story will go, is that we'll find out. He has some sort of back dealings or
It's very
behind
possible.
closed doors stuff.
Yeah.
I don't know.
There's a lot of things they're sprinkling in with him in terms of the set dressing around him and what he has access to. That
Yeah.
I'm like, who is he, and what is his history with some familiar characters that we might know from the book.
Yeah.
But yeah, we move on to Regina King, who plays Angela Abar, and she is talking about baking in front of children,
Mm-hmm.
while we see some footage of Dr. Manhattan building sandcastles on Mars.
Yep. Yeah, this scene was really interesting too, because like there was the obvious smiley face imagery with the egg yolks. I thought that was a nice little visual touch. There were a lot of like the visuals in this episode, especially for a TV series. Like they're really good at kind of recreating those recurring motifs and like even the image transitions that were in the comic.
Yeah, that's
So,
a big part of
That's
the
like
comic.
again, testament to the showrunners for like how good, like, and I think that's a perfect way, like obviously aside from telling a news story, I think it's a great way to kind of honor what they're adapting from without feeling so beholden to it, like Snyder's adaptation was.
Yes, where he was literally trying to recreate
Yeah.
shot for shot, panel by panel, which is cool to a degree. It makes it feel like you're watching like a live action motion comic, but
then there are parts where like it doesn't work,
It
or
doesn't
it seems
translate,
inconsistent. Yeah.
where they get to create this whole new sequel world, and they get to use filmic language to do similar tricks or brand new tricks because it's a different medium. So
Yeah, and I like that we get so when Abigail is talking about how she used to be a cop, like she has that moment where she starts going into like detail about like the surgery and everything. I was like, all right, like clearly there's a disconnect with her. Like she's still got a darkness. Like,
yeah,
I don't think I mean, even from the trailer, we know it's like either she's retired and she's going to come out of it, or she's not really retired.
Yeah.
But like,
Yeah, yeah.
it definitely like something's off. Like, and you see the teacher was like, kind of like,
that's enough.
Cutter's like, come on, these are kids. And they mentioned the White Knight.
Yes.
Which obviously I think we're going to learn more about that as the show progresses, when essentially all the cops were targeted. So I'm really curious to kind of see how that unfolds. And again, like, you know, is Chief Crawford involved in that? Like, is he a part of that? Like, there's just all these kind of things, like racing through, like all these things that they're setting up that I think are going to pay off.
Yeah.
And I think they did a really good job too, because like when that kid says Redfordations, like it's not been explicitly stated what that is, but like we can kind of
what it
like we know
meant.
what he's talking about. It's like either this kid's dumb and can't pronounce reparations, or like it's reparations, but for some reason they're called this.
Yeah.
So like to see that, and then like to see her son go off on him again, just like further kind of painting in strokes like the elements of racial tension that exist within this universe.
Yes. Yeah. And another little detail of the world, aside from the Redfordations, there were several in this scene, but another big one was she talks about growing up as a little girl in Vietnam, and the teacher
one of the
asks,
states.
was that before or after it became a state?
Yes.
Which, and then we see the American flag later on, but we've got a lot more stars than we used to.
Mm-hmm.
Well, it's also that just throwing back too interesting because in that first scene, I believe I was saying it correctly. The boy wraps up the baby in an American flag.
Mm-hmm.
So it's interesting. Like obviously, these visuals again are happening for a reason.
Yeah.
And I really dig that attention to detail in the show so far.
Yeah. And so the next scene is probably my biggest question about the whole
Oh yeah.
the whole episode. So the Angela's son, Topher, takes out the kid, and they're driving home. He's all bloodied. They're talking about it, and then it starts to rain squids.
Yeah.
That are like decomposing. They're
seem
like
to
falling
be-
apart.
Yeah, like
Yeah,
essentially once it stops raining, like they dry out almost.
Mm-hmm.
Just like the little things in the faculty.
So is that coming out of nowhere, or is that grounded in...
I think it's got to be tied to Veidt's
Mm-hmm.
thing
Yeah.
from the comic.
Yeah, that all ties into the big mystery and payoff of the comic, and it's hard to talk about that specific thing in terms of like, do we want to spoil that for anybody who's not as familiar with the book and that story and where it might lead?
Well, are we talking about Ryan, or are we talking about our listeners?
I think kind of like both.
Okay. Well, for Ryan's sake, you can't go read it right now, but if you're listening, maybe read the comic before the next episode. Because we're...
Issues 11 and 12.
yeah. So, yeah, specifically, yeah. Because we kind of, like, we're going to have to talk about it. Because the slug rain is very much tied to the end of the comic.
Yeah. Because as far as you saw in the Zack Snyder cut, he uses... It's been a while since I've watched it, but he uses Dr. Manhattan and his signature to...
Essentially detonate. Like, it's just an explosion.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a
essentially. It's like a psychic explosion or something. In the comics, it's a similar result, but it's a different thing entirely.
Okay.
So...
But it is grounded in Overwatch. Jeez. Watchmen lore.
Oh, yeah.
Yes, yes, very much so. So, I think, without saying too much, I think the rain is a direct result of the fallout, because we don't get any of the fallout in the comic. The comic just kind of, like, the only real fallout we see is that the Cold War ends because they enter into a peace treaty. They unite against a common threat. And then we see Night Owl and Silk Spectre living under assumed aliases, and that's kind of and then them about to deciding whether or not to publish Rorschach's Journal. Like, that's all we see after, like, in the final acts of Watchmen.
Yeah.
And we don't learn about any of the effects that explosion has, there's a lot of questions about what an event of that scale does, like,
in the long term.
Yeah.
Because Adrien asks Dr. Manhattan before he's gone for the last time as far as we know, where he asks him, like, I did the right thing. It all worked out in the end. He goes, Adrien, nothing ever ends.
Yeah.
which leaves him in a very stressed.
Yeah, it's like the one time we see Veidt kind of panicked and unsure of himself.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah, it's tied to that somehow, and I'm sure that'll probably be explained a little bit more.
Yeah,
because again, it's like this weird thing. And, not that it's uncommon for Lindelof to show us something, and then maybe they'll explain it later, and maybe not. So, but I feel like the show is setting up things that are going to pay off. So.
Yeah. No, I think so. 'Cause there are a few mysteries and questions regarding that and Veidt, because, we move on to, she gets home, she gets a page that says Little Bighorn.
Yeah.
In which she has to go. And we see her arrive at her bakery, her front for a bakery. And this is another scene where there were a lot of tidbits in this world where we see a big a blimp kind of a thing with an announcement for a countdown to a American Hero story,
yes.
Minutemen.
Yeah, well, and then she walks by the bus with the ad on it as well.
And then she walks by somebody reading a newspaper that says Adrien Veidt officially declared dead.
Yep.
And that's a huge question, because from the get-go I knew, Jeremy Irons is playing Adrien Veidt in this show, but wait, there's this newspaper, and I had seen like a leak of that newspaper like months ago, and I'm like, well, what does all that mean?
I don't know that this episode really answered any of that.
No, it doesn't. So it's just another mystery.
No.
Yeah, it's definitely opening up all kinds of
I'll talk about all the
questions.
Jeremy Irons stuff when we get to him. But then she passes Louis Gossett Jr., the guy in the wheelchair, who asks, like, hey, when's that baker going to be open? And then he even essentially tells her what he's going to do later in the episode. When we talked about it, he looks at her and goes, hey, do you think I could lift 200 pounds? And I was like, is he like a superhero who's not a superhero anymore? Like, what's he talking about?
Yeah.
It's so bizarre. And then, of course, she goes in. She suits up as Sister Night, gets in this bitchin' Knight Rider looking car, drives into a trailer park, and then just kicks down the door and apprehends a guy that we later learn she believes to be affiliated with the 7th Cavalry.
Yeah, a guy from Nixonville, I believe it is.
Oh, was
that
it?
what they call it? Yeah, you got the big statue of Richard Nixon.
Oh,
out
yeah,
there.
that was another thing. Yeah, I remember seeing the big sign of Nixon. I was like, he's got to be dead by now in this universe, right?
I think, according to the kids were reciting all the presidents, and they recite Nixon, Ford, and then Redford. So what I think Nixon died shortly before Redford got elected in this world.
Interesting.
Because Ford was still vice president.
Yeah, so he would have assumed the mantle until such a time.
So, but this is another thing that pops up that makes me wonder, like, so she goes in, she apprehends this dude, obviously no warrant, nothing. She just goes and gets him. Mm-hmm. Are these other masked, like, there's the police officers who are wearing like the yellow masks, but these other people are like detectives, I guess. But like,
detectives also seem like they essentially, because like we see later, they essentially seem like they're the police's special forces. Like they're SWAT essentially. Like they handle, like, because most of the cops seem like kind of beat cops for the most part. They handle kind of the lower stuff, and then the detectives are handling things like interrogations, apprehensions, like raids, like all these way more intense things. And we've only seen a handful of them, so I'm kind of curious if we're gonna, like, I feel like we're gonna get introduced to more as the series goes on, and because I'm really curious to learn more of the ins and outs of how their police force operates. But like,
absolutely,
but yeah, right now it seems essentially like the detectives are basically their special weapons and tactics for the most part.
Yeah, and even so, they still can't use the lethal force.
Yeah, well, and that's Sister Night. She goes in of her own accord.
Yeah,
like, because she has the conversation with Crawford later. It's like, I went in, I apprehended somebody that I knew to be an affiliate, and had reasonable belief and everything that he was associated with the 7th Cavalry. We also learned she was irritated that she didn't find out until way later as well.
Yeah.
And then it's interesting too, the use of a little bighorn as the code for it, because that's Custer's last stand. So obviously there's a historical tie with using that as like their code phrase for what I assume was maybe an officer down or a 7th Cavalry associated officer shooting or something.
That is another one. The lapse in why she wasn't called in immediately. Was Crawford doing something in that time? Did he because from the point where he leaves the theater, right? We're talking like the next day.
Yeah.
We're talking like it's been a long time.
So part of me thinks that that's tied to because they prep the police force. They show that video that the 7th Cavalry made.
Yeah.
And part of me wonders if he was holding off because he didn't want to come to terms with the fact that they had resurfaced. Because he even talks with her later. Like, they had, 3 years of, no incidents, and everything had kind of settled down. Like, they'd made their truce or whatever without any issues. And then, just like that, one night, at a routine traffic stop, it's reignited.
Yeah.
So I think it was more him trying to prevent an overreaction, wanting to get all the facts and wanting to get everything, because Charlie hadn't recovered at that point yet. Yeah. So literally all they had to go on was his correspondence with Panda over the radio dispatch. So,
and then this video is released to them.
Yeah.
Where the 7th Cavalry got some videographer to take a really professional looking video.
Yeah, the zoom on that, really good.
Where they're using a lot of Rorschach's verbiage from his diary.
Yeah. Yeah, straight up quotes lifted. And it's interesting too, because that goes further. It's again, we know Rorschach was kind of unhinged, but I don't think that character was racist, in his motivations or anything. But it's interesting seeing how one group of people will latch on to the writings of something. It's the same way that the Nazis latched on to Nietzsche's concept of Mensch and Übermensch, and they took that and they turned it into something way different than what he ever meant for it. And that's exactly what we're seeing happening with Rorschach's journal and his writings and all of his just everything as a vigilante. There's oh, no, this means that white people should get what they want somehow. And that's the conclusion they arrived at.
Yeah. That, and they probably looked into his whole philosophy of the black and the white never meeting and converging.
Yeah. That's a really good point to take too.
Yeah.
And then, of course, obviously the visual symbolism of the Rorschach. So. And then, of course, we learned that Panda wears a panda mask in this scene. It's not just a clever name.
Literally a panda.
And nobody seems to like him.
Yeah.
So do you think he's just kind of just theorizing at this point about that kind of a role is in the police force, he's the one that keeps the rules, and so they
he definitely seems...
He's in charge of the weapons and buzzing them out,
right?
At least,
but he's also he's also literally holding what appears to be kind of their bylaws.
Yeah,
right. So is he the HR department of?
Essentially, he kind of seems he definitely there's a reason he's working that and not a beat. He's clearly a desk cop.
Yeah.
So he clearly his thing seems to be kind of order and wanting to prevent anything, because he even says I think you're making a big mistake by doing this, because he even sits there and cites the law to their captain, who probably knows the damn rules back and forth by this point, or he wouldn't be a captain. But he authorized it anyway. He even looks at the officer, is do you feel threatened? Do you feel threatened? Authorize it, release
it's
the
my
weapons.
funeral.
Yeah, and great line, which, oh man. We come to later.
Yeah,
we'll recircle to that.
Article 4, I think, is what that's called.
Yes.
So they only get 24-hour release of the deadly weapons too.
Yeah, which is interesting. Which like makes me wonder is like, do they get an extended release like if martial law is declared or something?
So before we get too far though, we kind of yada-yada'd over Tim Blake Nelson's big scene.
Oh yeah.
Oh no, that comes next.
Is it next?
Yeah.
Oh, I thought.
Oh yeah, because it's after the video.
Yeah.
Oh, gotcha. Okay.
No, because then we go to Judd goes into his office and Angela's there with her feet propped up on his desk and she's drinking coffee out of his owl mug.
Yes.
Owl mug, and we see a copy of Under the Hood on his desk, which, if you're familiar with the comic, that's the original Night Owl, his biography, his autobiography. So seeing that, and also we see that he has Archie.
Yep.
And Archie's been refitted as a police vehicle. And so, like, this whole scene made me wonder. I didn't know if he was supposed to be, like, old Dan.
Yeah.
Or not. But I'm like, that wasn't their secret identity names that they were using.
No.
But obviously he wasn't. I think I figured that out later.
But yeah, it's like some of these, it feels like they're there deliberately to kind of mislead you into those conclusions.
Yeah.
Which is kind of fun.
Yeah. Oh, they're all about the breadcromm trail so far.
Oh yeah, I was like, hey, remember this thing? Maybe
Yeah.
it's this thing. Ah, now we're kidding. we got 8 more episodes. We're not going to give it to you in the first one.
Calm down. So then Angela, like, so obviously we get introduced to kind of Angela and Crawford's relationship.
Yeah.
They're much more casual. The scene prior, we've got all of the police are still wearing masks. They're all like suited up, which makes me wonder if officers know who other officers are. Are they?
Yeah,
informed?
I feel, because I was thinking that
rules are
too.
there?
I feel like if they're like, because one of them's literally eating a donut like around his mask.
Yeah. And later we see 2 of them smoking outside of Crawford's house, I believe.
And then panic and kind of throw the masks
Yeah,
up.
it's like, which makes me. I think you're right. Like I think the cops, even the beat cops, don't know who they're working with aside from like the captain.
Yeah, which is really interesting. So then you get kind of this dynamic between Angela and Crawford that is much more casual. They're kind of she's sitting in his chair, she's drinking from his mug, all that.
Yeah, like, and she's got like the eye, but like it's clearly obviously her.
Yeah,
Yeah.
Like, because I mean, it seems like it's there the same way like Batman wears his stuff that like make him look more intimidating and everything with the mask. But yeah, it sets up the possibility, which I mean, I feel like there's no way they can't. Like, there's gonna be a 7th Cavalry operating as a cop. Like,
Yeah.
I feel like that's gonna happen at some point.
it's kind of ripe for the picking.
Like, yeah, especially like if they really don't know who they're working with. Like, if only like a handful of people like know who their officers are, it'd be super easy to slip them all in there.
Yeah. Absolutely. She reveals to Crawford that she went and apprehended this man and has him in her trunk right now.
Yep.
She says she has a nose for white supremacy and he smells like bleach.
Yep.
Which is a great line. A lot of really good like lines throughout the whole episode. Like Crawford in the last one was like, "It's my funeral," right? You've got it smells like bleach, which is it's just clever. I hope they can keep that like a lot of really good quotable takeaways that I think will carry the show longevity wise.
Oh yeah.
Well, plus that I don't think Lindelof's gonna bail on the show to make a Star Wars spinoff or whatever Benioff and Weiss did.
Or not.
Yeah, to compromise the final season. So I think we'll be all right, at least for this first season.
If there is anything past the first season, because
That's very true. It hasn't been picked up yet for anything.
Yeah, I heard a quote from Lindelof like from last week or so saying that it's like a very succinct, like enclosed story that he wants to tell, which is in the spirit of the book.
Yeah,
So
I would
whether
not be
that's
mad if it stayed to one season either. Like,
me as well.
I mean, I think that's a problem with shows and movies especially, is like they're all so concerned about getting the next one out that they kind of like phone it in. Like, and nothing's like, not even comic book movies. Like, Universal tried to give us like the Dark Universe with like rebooting the Universal Monsters.
Like, let's
Which-
create a brand as soon as possible.
Yeah, which is nuts.
Yeah.
Like, what even the newest Predator tried to do it.
I
And,
never
like,
watched it.
Oh, it's bad. It was. I have never been more disappointed in a movie I was excited about, save for probably the prequels. But like, I mean, why am I blanking on his name? Shane Black, writing
yeah.
and directing, who's got a pretty solid track
yeah.
record, especially as far as directing. But then you look back and you realize, like, these are action comedies. Predator's not really an action comedy kind of thing. Like, Predator and Predators had its moments, but like, it was still very much like an unapologetic, like, action sci-fi type thing. And what happens in The Predator is Shane Black writes everyone as the comic relief, which is like just cheapens
That's the
the
way to do it.
tension. It's a problem. And then, like, it literally ends with them essentially saying, it was like, all right, this is going to, like, set up a new Predator trilogy. And it was like, no, this one sucked. I don't want to see any more of these. No, thank you.
No. Oh.
So, yeah, sorry, I got a little off topic. But,
Well, it's okay.
But yeah, I wish more people would, like, just take this approach of, like, let's do this one season. Let's tell a story. If we get to keep telling it, awesome. If not, we wrapped it up.
Yeah.
Like, and that's the way
Leave
it
the
should
people
be.
wanting more
Like,
as opposed to...
everybody thinks that they've got to do the MCU model, which makes sense for them. They have decades of stories and characters to pull from. Like, Predator doesn't need this. The Wolfman and the Creature from the Black Lagoon don't need this. Like, we don't need to set up Russell Crowe as, like, our Q by also establishing him as, like, Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. Like, I've got some opinions about The Mummy, but that's a whole other thing.
Another one I never saw.
It's bad. It's very bad. Like, the only good parts of it are Jake Johnson. And I say that as a person.
Yeah.
I say that as a person who loves almost everything Tom Cruise does.
Yeah, no,
It's-
that was the main draw for me. I was like, well, I see Tom Cruise running like it's a Mission Impossible.
It's bad. I'm glad that Sofia Boutella from the first Kingsman was getting work, but I mean, it's not a good movie. It's very bad. And Jake Johnson's character is essentially the friend from An American Werewolf in London throughout the entire movie.
Oh.
Yeah, it's really just like, of all the movies you chose to rip off, this was the one you went with. I'm not mad about it because Jake Johnson's perfect for this kind of role, but yeah, aside from that,
Oh. When you said that, it just like made me think like, oh, I really want them to remake An American Werewolf in London with Jake Johnson.
oh, I would be on board for it. I want them to recast Oscar Isaac as Jake Johnson in the new Star Wars.
Oh,
That's all, or at least cast him as Poe Dameron's twin brother,
oh, that'd be nice.
Joe Dameron.
Joe and Poe.
But like, I mean, look, like, put those two side by side. You cannot tell me that Oscar Isaac is just not the handsome version of Jake Johnson. Not that Jake Johnson's unattractive. Oscar Isaac is the handsome, award-winning version of Jake Johnson.
Yeah, he's the Spider-Man that everybody wanted to believe that.
That Andrew Garfield was.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's pretty accurate. Andrew Garfield, and then Tobey Maguire, but, you know, maybe 12 years younger instead of a 30-year-old playing a high schooler or whatever.
That's believable. The audience buys it.
Sorry, we were on our way to the pod.
Well, yeah.
Yes.
We got way
Yeah,
late.
she asked. So back to Watchmen. Angela asks if he should, or does she ask, or does she just say put him in the pod?
I think she said something about it, and then he said put him in the pod.
Yeah.
So then
Crawford
we
gives
get
the order.
Looking Glass going in and interrogating him.
Also,
Holy
did
cow.
anyone besides me during the interrogation, did anyone else, like, question and ask, like, is he just giving him a Voight-Kampff test right now?
Oh,
Because that was very much the vibe that
yeah.
I got. I was like, I know, like, obviously he's trying to find out if he's affiliated with the 7th Cavalry, especially with the repetition, but it very much felt like that opening scene in Blade Runner
Yes.
when they're giving Breon James's character the Voight-Kampff test. Like, I was just waiting on this hillbilly to be like, what's a tortoise?
And in 2049, they brought it back.
Oh, yeah. God, I need to watch that one again. Because they do it to Batista in that one, right?
Yeah, and
It's mostly Ryan Gosling.
yeah,
right? What's his face?
he takes the test like several times. He has to like check in all the time.
Oh, yeah. God, I need to watch it again.
Absolutely.
I mean, I loved it. I haven't seen it since it was in the theater. But I remember loving it.
Yeah, this definitely felt incredibly reminiscent of that, though.
Mhm.
Like,
Yeah.
it just,
Yes.
and basically seemed like it served the same purpose.
Yeah, well, it's interesting too. Like even down to like the visuals, like they were trying to do like a Ludovico technique type thing.
Yeah.
I was like, this is really interesting that like it's set up this way, like and that he, like I mean essentially he was a human Voight-Kampff test.
Yeah.
Like as he came out, I was like, oh, like it's dilated responses, like and all this. I was like, Jesus, like this character, like what an interesting character, and like
Yeah.
what a cool set of skills that this guy has.
Side note: how do you find out you can do that? Like, if I put a person in the room and I play a very specific set of video clips, and I wear a reflective mask, I can tell.
Yeah, it's interesting because like one a lot of the images too, like a lot of like the ones that popped out the most were like black families, stuff like that, like things that obviously would trigger a response in like a racist, like or a person with like racially motivated leanings. So it was real interesting the use of imagery and determining like what that meant, like based on how he responded.
And I did notice one of the images was a one-eyed squid.
Oh, I missed that.
And when that came up, he also asked, do you believe that transdimensional attacks are hoaxes staged by the U.S. government?
Oh, yeah.
So, which
Plays into
your
I'm
questions
sure.
there.
Yeah. Well, and that even that ties back to Rorschach too.
Uh-huh.
Because like I mean, Rorschach's whole thing was exposing that plot.
He got to a certain point without like the final
piece, but
Yeah.
like he had his suspicions.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, that's really interesting. I didn't make that connection until just now.
Yeah, so it's interesting that in this world, the cavalry is under the impression that
They're
it's
kind of like
the
flat earthers
government.
almost.
Yeah,
like they've got this ridiculous belief that almost everyone else is kind of accepted as fact.
yeah.
Except they're not necessarily.
I was gonna say,
off.
but they're the ones.
Yeah,
who are-
which it's flipped because like they're not necessarily in the wrong.
yeah. Another interesting juxtaposition to real world.
Yeah.
So then we also kind of get introduced to like what I guess is going to be like the A team. We get, so we got Looking Glass, we've got Red Scare, and we've got, what's her name? Sister Knight.
Sister Knight. Mm-hmm.
And we start to see like, okay, so there's something like they operate seemingly as kind of a unit in special scenarios. I don't know.
Not before she kicks the crap out of the white supremacists.
And then
Yeah.
while she's doing that, we get this shot of like water and then blood mingling in with the water and creeping out from under the door, which I loved because I was like, oh, this looks like an image that I would see like Dave Gibbons draw in the comic.
Yeah.
It looks like a panel. So she gets the information out of him that they're cooped up in a cattle ranch.
Yep.
So then we move on and we get this awesome horrific cattle ranch sequence in which
The raid scene. Yeah, it's nuts that like everyone but her goes in like loaded with tactical weaponries and she goes in with like a sidearm.
yeah.
I was like that's crazy. Like they've got like machine guns, tactical assault rifles, and she's just like shooting a pistol.
And they're using
Ducked behind a cow.
dead cows as barriers.
Yeah, I kept thinking of the shootout in Django Unchained, where he's just leaning behind bodies and they're just getting shot up in front of him.
Oh yeah, I mean that was a cool set piece. Like the way it built, the tension, the reaction. You've got the kind of the intrigue with they're taking watch batteries out.
Yeah, they're collecting watch
immediately you're
batteries.
like, I have no idea what's happening there.
Yeah, like I mean, it definitely like the way. I got the feeling like they were building essentially something with the intention of using it as a bomb.
Yeah.
Like that much definitely come across, but you're not really sure why until like later, like they kind of explain it. And there's like, oh yeah, the battery. Like she even says something about like the old watch batteries
that got people sick.
Yeah, so like they were clearly building like a dirty bomb of some kind, which was really interesting. And again, like that's in keeping with kind of like that militia type shit. Is like them just doing all this in a trailer and prepping for a war that either is never going to come or that they're going to start if it doesn't.
Mm-hmm. So she gets in there and gets to take out the guy and unmasks him, and he's the guy,
truck driver.
who shot the officer at the beginning. And before she gets the chance to take him, he takes a cyanide pill.
Yeah, he suicides himself.
Which is another interesting thing that made me think of the comic because of a suicide pill being forced upon somebody in a similar fashion.
Yes, yeah. Well, because right before it, they all take a pill for themselves too. We see that happen, and and it's pretty obvious from seeing that scene. I was like, oh, okay, these are poison. Like that's what these are. That's why they're. Because for a second, I was in the mindset of The Boys, and I was thinking it was gonna be like a compound V thing. I was like, oh, maybe they're gonna get superpowers. I was like, oh no, these are cyanide capsules. Okay,
it's much more gorilla. Yeah,
yeah, I'm thinking of the wrong comic book. I've got my lines crossed here. But it was also the best trailer fight scene since Kill Bill 2, I think.
No, I'd agree with that.
Don't get a lot of trailer fight scenes anymore.
No.
And I'm a sucker for well choreographed fight scenes, especially in tight spaces. Like that Kill Bill and the train car fight in From Russia with Love. Those are all amazing close quarters hand to hand fight sequences, and that's really the only scene of action that we get for the most part. Outside the intro, it's an action piece, but it's more kind of a disaster
horrific
type. Yeah, exactly. Whereas this is a straightforward shootout hand to hand thing, and that's the only action we really get in the entire episode.
Yeah, and it kind of people would associate with a superhero. Like you said, hand to hand combat, taking out the bad guys.
Yeah.
Kind of a sequence.
So
did anybody else do anything other than Sister Night? I'm trying to think of anybody
Red
else.
Scare came in right after she did. Was he taking care of somebody else? Well,
because one of theirs got hit when they were making their approach. They were essentially laying down cover fire, and then they toss out the smoke grenade and stuff, which actually allowed her to make her run while they were reloading the 50 caliber machine gun mounted on the back of their truck, which that's insane too.
Yeah, in this world that where gun control seems to be pretty tight, there's obviously a market where these are coming from.
Well, it's interesting too because we've only seen it applied to the cops.
Mm-hmm.
We don't know what it's like for civilians. It might be, and again, do those rules exist for the cops as a means to check police brutality? Is there a reason that cops have to request permission to use a firearm? Is that the same for civil? Because I guess they mentioned earlier there's a waiting period.
Yeah,
it's
6 months.
They mentioned the 6 month waiting period. So it's not unattainable, but there are stricter laws, it seems like. But at the same time, they're you go to a gun show now, there's nothing to say that those don't exist in this universe, where people can get those things, or even if they, you can get away with a lot if you say you're selling antiques as opposed to firearms.
Yes.
So it's interesting. Did they get these illegally? Did they circumvent the law? How did these militia guys end up with a military, essentially an anti-aircraft gun, that's belt fed, which is nuts.
So while they're dealing with the machine gun, the plane takes off, and then we get
we get Archie.
Yeah.
We get Archimedes.
Yeah. So is it actually the same craft, or I guess what I took that as was which also kind of fell in line with I guess the police are kind of the government Minutemen was maybe they just have these now. Maybe these are...
My initial thought is that Dan might have gone into essentially a consultancy type gig, or possibly even designing tech for the cops, because I saw that and I was I didn't take that as oh, this is the Archie. I was they probably have a garage full of these.
Yeah, that could be it.
Because if their detectives are essentially superheroes, it would stand to reason that they would have tactical vehicles, tactical gear that they would use for that, like grappling hook guns, whatever else. Like they probably have essentially their own armory and like motor pool for stuff like that.
Mm-hmm.
That was kind of the vibe that I got.
Yeah,
because like they wreck it, and I mean, no one's distraught. Nobody was like, "Oh, that's like a 40 million aircraft." It was like, "Oh, we got 7 more back at the motor pool."
Right.
Like,
yeah,
that was kind of the vibe that I got.
Yeah, so we'll see. Because my initial thought when I saw it, I was like, "This is the one." And when it got crashed, I was like,
"Well, then as because she has that line, she was like, they took off in an airplane. They're right below you." I was like, "Okay." Don Johnson is clearly up in the air, like the eye in the sky. I was almost expecting like something ridiculous, like a Shield helicarrier type thing, and then like they come down and Archie. I was like, oh, okay, all right. And it was interesting too, because they straight up they went seek and destroy on the plane.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
which
very much so.
Which makes me wonder, because I didn't quite catch it. They got on the plane with some of the batteries, right?
Yeah.
So like that, because like they just burned up the plane, which makes me wonder if like that was essentially going to be their suicide run, and that's why they were so reckless in their apprehension.
Mm-hmm. Interesting.
So then, Crawford's on the plane with
Pirate Jenny. I think it's the character's name.
That's her name, Pirate Jenny.
Yeah.
Okay. I never caught her name in the show.
Yeah, the only reason I know is just because of the subtitles.
Gotcha.
So. Yeah, I definitely after this I went through the wiki to kind of figure out character names and who was who and all that to kind of get a better grasp, because I saw Pirate Jenny during the credits. I was like, who the hell was Pirate Jenny?
Yeah.
And then in the wiki it's like Crawford and Pirate Jenny. I was like, okay, she was the other lady with. All right, I got it. That makes sense.
Yeah. So we get this scene of like Crawford's clearly like willing to go farther than she was.
Yeah.
They end up crashing. She seems a little ambivalent, but like she didn't really pop up again. I'm curious where she falls into this. Is she part of this elite team? Is she?
I would think so. She's seated
like
there with them in the other scene. She's right alongside Red Scare and Looking Glass.
She doesn't have a very good mask, but you know, it's.
Yeah, I feel like we're gonna see all of them again.
Yeah,
for sure. Like especially after what happens at the end of the episode, we'll definitely see them all.
Yeah.
So.
But they basically walk away from this whole engagement like they ended the threat, I guess, but they don't really walk away with anything, because the one guy they were going to capture cyanides himself. The plane crashes. Like they find out about the batteries, but there's really not much we find out from that.
Yeah, as far as what they're doing other than the batteries, really.
Yeah, now we just get like probably like any terrorist group, like there are various cells operating in different parts. And, and they just happen to stumble across this one.
Yeah, and as far as like that goes, and where this, how it expands globally, I paused the sequence where the newspaper said that Adrien Veidt was dead.
Yeah.
And it says the Statue of Liberty was closed due to KKK vandalism. And I'm like, oh, in this world, the cavalry exists, and the Ku Klux Klan exists.
Yeah. So I mean, I think there's definitely ties to it. They probably ties that they're not willing to admit. The same reason that the alt-right has adopted alt-right and not neo-Nazi.
Yeah.
So I think that's honestly a lot of what the name choice is. Even though, again, the conscious choice to spell cavalry with a K is a pretty clear link. So it's one, and also too, during Looking Glass's interrogation, the guy says, like, do I need to get my lawyer? And he says, no, we don't go through that for terrorists or something along those lines. So, like, which leads me to believe that the 7th Cavalry has a presence outside of Tulsa to be labeled as a terrorist organization.
Yeah.
Like, it could just be the South, but, like, they definitely exist in a pretty major way, especially if, like, they previously mentioned, like, they had to make some kind of truce with them and lay all that to rest, so... And all this stuff is kind of rearing its ugly head now in the present day.
After that sequence, we move on. We do a really cool fade. It's also a good.
That shot, the sky transition to the that's a great shot.
Turning into what I would assume is the English countryside.
Yes.
We see a man riding in to a castle on horseback.
Mm-hmm.
And he is welcomed by his butler or his help. And we see him inside nude, typing on a typewriter while he's getting his thighs massaged.
Yes, by Miss Crookshanks.
Yes.
I can't remember the guy's name, but Crookshanks stuck out to me solely because of the Harry Potter reference.
Yeah.
Mr. Phillips is
Phillips,
his name.
there it is.
But they never state his name.
But we have to. It's Veidt.
We know.
We all know it's Veidt.
Yeah, if you look at IMDb, but it's just like interesting that.
Well, even then, like I mean, if you were gonna cast somebody to look like the older version of Veidt, or even specifically the older version of, what was it, Matthew Good that played him in the movie, like Jeremy Irons is a dead ringer for that.
I was so excited about that.
Like
casting.
down to his frame, down to his mannerisms, down to the way he's composed, like you could have cast Irons as Veidt in the original Watchmen, and I would have been like, he's a bit old, but that's not a wrong choice.
Yeah. The only other person I could see like really perfectly playing that character would be like Christoph Waltz.
Yeah.
I think would be a good one.
Yeah, and even then, he's probably too old at this point.
Yeah.
Like, because I mean, he looks older than Irons does.
Yeah.
Like even down to the robe that they bring him, like for his anniversary dinner.
Yeah, that was interesting. Like what anniversary?
I think it's the anniversary of what Veidt did at the end of Watchmen.
I don't think so, because this is September, and that takes place on November 1st, November 2nd.
Interesting.
So yeah, I
guess I didn't notice the day, because that's what I was thinking the whole time, because it was so vague.
That's what I would think too. But I mean, this could be a different time.
Yeah.
This doesn't necessarily have to take place at the same time the other events are.
Yeah,
We can
it makes
assume.
me think that it's tied to that somehow.
That's what I thought.
Like either that, because I mean, Veidt declared dead. Like that's recent.
Mm-hmm.
But I mean, like what if he's counting like that first day as like that anniversary, like the first day of the rest of his life, or something like that.
Something.
Because I mean, it would make sense. Like that'd be the kind of thing that someone like Veidt would do, is fake his own death and disappear into relative obscurity under like an assumed name. Because again, they never address him by name. It's Master constantly.
Yes, I kept looking for a name and they never gave one.
Yeah, and even in the wiki entry, like he's referred to as like the Master of the Manor or something that we see.
Yeah,
like there's no name given there, and I'm also convinced that his help is either robots or clones.
Yeah, the very interesting.
Like they have like
mannerisms.
slight things that are off in their mannerisms. And like Phillips handing him a horseshoe to cut the cake with.
Yeah, I was like, is this
this
an
is
inside
a glitch
joke
in programming. Like this is like these are androids or something. Like it's something along those lines.
That would make a lot of sense.
Or they're literally humans that he created, because we know, like with his weird cat thing in Watchmen, like we know that he had like kind of done some stuff with like genetic experimentation. Yeah. So, I mean, it would stand to reason that he might have test tube babies as his help.
That would make sense, considering he shows them a script for a play that he's worked on, that he wants them to play the lead roles in, and they get very excited by that. Which the title of it is The Watchmaker's Son, which, if that's what they are, that would kind of make sense.
What's the timeline in the Watchmen comics? What does it take place over, like a week or something?
It's like 3 weeks. It begins on October 12th is when...
Yeah.
And then it ends on November 2nd. And then obviously decades.
I'm just trying to think of other things that the anniversary could be. It was like...
because
could
none
be
of it
the
takes
murder
place.
of the comedian.
No, that'd be
because that would
October.
Yeah. Or maybe the comedian finding out about his experiment.
That could be it.
Because that took place probably beforehand.
Or maybe the inception of when he comes up with it.
Yeah. There's just a lot of things. But the bottom line is there's no, like, 90 to 10 odds. Jeremy Irons is Veidt.
Oh,
like,
yeah.
Like,
I think we know, yeah.
The
gold and purple cake and robe.
Yeah.
But yeah, super interesting sequence there. And another reference the watchmaker's son could be in reference to is also Dr. Manhattan.
Oh yeah,
because he's
yeah.
the watchmaker's
Who was
son.
a watchmaker's
Yeah.
son. Now that'd be too late too, as Dr. Manhattan's Exile would be after that.
Mm-hmm.
So, man.
Yeah. So mystery of what this anniversary could be, and what's going on there. But that's the only taste we get of the Jeremy Irons character.
Yeah. Was he riding that horse bareback?
Oh, I wasn't paying attention.
Because she just makes the comment that his thighs are like rubbed raw from it.
Yeah.
And I was like, that should realistically be the only way that happens is if you ride raw. Because part of the whole reason of a saddle is to help prevent that.
That'd be something that Veidt would do.
Oh yeah, 100%. I mean, the world's greatest athlete. Why bother with a saddle?
Yeah.
So.
What was that? That was such a hard turn into Veidt, or whoever it is. I don't remember what came after that though.
After that,
That was the dinner, right?
Yeah, the dinner at Angela's house with her family, where they name off all those presidents at the beginning.
And then we're treated to a lovely rendition of a number from Oklahoma.
Mm-hmm. People will say we're in love.
Yeah. Which, man, good. Who knew Don Johnson had such a nice singing voice?
Yeah.
Well, I mean, I guess everyone. He did release Heartbeat in the 80s, so. I gotta listen to that song. If you're listening, listen to the Don Johnson hit single "Heartbeats."
I'll have to find that.
Oh, there's a video for it and everything. It's from when he parlayed his starring role on Miami Vice into a shot at music stardom.
Oh wow!
It's not good, but oh boy, it's worth listening to.
It's like the Joe Pesci rap from the '90s.
Oh man, it might be worse than the Joe Pesci rap. Talking about the rap from the film The Super?
Yes.
Oh, man. I'd have to listen to the Super rap again. They're both pretty bad.
I know what we're doing after we're done recording.
Yeah. Do I own the 7-inch single of Heartbeat by Don Johnson? Of course I do.
Awesome. And he goes to the kitchen for some wine and some nose candy.
Yeah. Oh, my God. That was so good. It's like I was watching that scene today. And, like, the framing, I was like, this is the framing you see when something bad is about to happen.
Yeah.
And then, like, you hear that sniff, I was like, oh, okay, I guess he's just doing a bump in the kitchen. And then he comes back and just everyone but the kids notice it, apparently.
Which, I mean, kind of alludes that this is a thing that everybody knows about. Nobody seemed shocked by it.
Yeah. I mean, there are, because, I mean, you have cops who essentially are operating within the law but still outside the law somehow. So, I mean, they're probably flexible on things like cocaine bumps during dinner.
Mm-hmm.
Then you get the musical number, which was... there was this nice kind of juxtaposition of, like, okay, he's doing something he shouldn't do, and then now he's kind of charming everybody.
Yeah. Well, the interesting thing I just remembered right before that is when he's in the kitchen, they're playing that Unforgettable song.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Which...
It's featured in the film.
It's in the film.
And there's a commercial.
For like
nostalgia.
Nostalgia cologne, yes. I was going to say it was during the sex scene, but that's Leonard Cohen, so which is a way different thing. But yeah, that started playing. And I was like, "Why does this sound familiar?" I was like, "Oh yeah." Mm-hmm. Like there are way more like subtle and not so subtle nods to the comic, but like none of them ever feel heavy-handed.
No.
Like they all feel organic. Like they all feel kind of in place there, which is nice because like especially like not to go back to like Star Wars, which I mentioned earlier, but something like. Rogue One, where like they shoehorn in the cameo from
Dr. Evazan
and Ponda Baba, like in the spaceport that blows up 2 minutes later. It's like, look, we don't need to see these characters say the same thing they said to Luke in New Hope. Why are we saying this? Come on.
Yeah, no, it was much more organic.
Yeah, and I really like that. Like I went into the show expecting like at worst to feel pretty indifferent to it, but I'm fully on board for what they're doing, and I think everything they're doing is for a reason, and like they've made some really interesting choices that I think are going to help the series kind of stand on its own legs apart from the source material that it's inspired by.
Yeah. No, and then we move on from that scene. It ends. We hear some a clock ticking, and
Yes.
it continues to tick to underscore the next scene of Angela and Judd talking outside her home, talking about the batteries that they're collecting.
Yeah, which the clocks are. I thought that was going to be the end of the episode.
Yeah, me
the
too.
clock ticking.
Mm-hmm.
Like it seemed so perfect, but then it kept going.
Yeah, they're talking about the collecting the old synthetic lithium batteries that made people sick. We already touched upon that, and then
Yeah, she said something about like they're making a cancer bomb or something.
yeah,
and, like,
he
the
teases
dirty
her
bomb.
with that. Yeah, she doesn't think he's taking it seriously enough.
He's just trying to be aloof and cool about it,
yeah.
and not panic.
And then pretty much ends there, and we move on, and we see an animated sequence.
Yeah.
Where
that threw me for a second too
Yeah.
until I realized what it was.
Yeah, it's a promo for another promo we see for American Hero Story, which I think we'll see play out throughout this.
Oh, absolutely.
In a very similar fashion that I think it's probably going to be their Black Freighter to a degree.
Part of me is really, really curious if they're gonna, because in that promo you see the characters build, but you don't see actors build.
Mm-hmm.
Part of me is almost hoping that, like, obviously, like they did with like Redford becoming president, like that they'll actually have real actors like come in just for those small roles.
Yeah.
It's like Ryan Reynolds as Dollar Bill or
That'd be
whatever.
awesome. We see a poster of Dollar Bill too.
Yeah,
in
yeah.
the trailer.
And then the Hooded Justice billboard on the bus.
Yeah. So I'm looking forward to the play out of that.
Yeah.
So Judd gets a call from home that Charlie Sutton is just woken up.
Yes.
So he's going out to
yeah.
see him. So he gets in a uniform and he leaves. While he's on the way there, we hear a radio DJ talking about Senator Joe Keene complaining about 30 years of Redford. That's when they mention the 6-month wait for guns.
Yep.
He talks about Joe Jr. possibly running. And that's when he gets some flat tires because he's run over a spike strip.
Yep.
And then there's a flash of white light, and that's pretty much the end of that scene.
Yeah. And that's like as soon as he drove off on his own without like an escort, I was like,
Yeah.
oh man, this is
And
it's too bad. I liked him.
Yeah, and the score, the Trent Reznor and
Atticus Ross
score, it just like fills you with a sense of dread.
Oh,
It
yeah.
felt like a John Carpenter score.
Yeah, that's like I've spent this last month. I've been listening to like a lot of like 80s horror scores. I was actually just listening to a Creep Show earlier today, and that's very much the vibe. Like that's part. Like I've just been really tuned into scores like lately this last month, and I was like, all right, something bad's gonna happen.
Yeah.
I like as soon as he drove off alone, I was like, okay, something's happening. But I was so invested in the radio, like what the host was saying.
Building
It
the world.
really caught me off guard when he hit the spikes.
strips, yeah.
I was like, oh dang, I just wanted a little bit more of that world
I
building.
think this episode is like, and again, like the comic, it's really good at giving you information that like that distracts you. That like kind of like pulls you away from the main thing. Yeah, like the Veidt headline. Like you look at that, it's just like, oh, and then it's like, oh, all right, we're away from this. She's going into her fake bakery now.
Yeah, it becomes very obvious at different points. Like the other things that are happening parallel in the story are very interesting on their own. They're probably worthy of their own story.
Oh yeah,
to begin with.
And I mean that's part of what made the comic work so. It's because like the world was so fully fleshed out and realized because they did like all these little background things that just lend themselves to that, and I think that's where a lot of shows fall short, a lot of movies, a lot of comics, a lot of everything is they have these really cool concepts, but then like they never flesh them out beyond that, like and some people make cases like, oh well, it's just these tiny little details. It's like, yeah, but those tiny little details, like people will notice, even if they're not aware that they're noticing it at first. Like little things. Like you take a movie like Get Out, where like after a rewatch, like you realize everyone that had like the lobotomy scars in that movie, like you never saw those scars until like later in the movie, like when their hair got knocked out of the way or their hat got knocked off. Like all these little touches that like just further reinforce the story. Like they make it that much better. Those little touches work.
Yeah.
And they make things resonate, and they make you so much more invested and draw you in so much more than when people don't take that kind of attention to detail.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. No, I love what they're doing there with that. It feels very organic and similar to
absolutely
the work that it's based upon. It makes it feel like it's standing
I
alone with
honestly, moving forward, I might have to watch each episode twice.
Yeah.
Because like there's stuff, Travis, that you're picking up on that like I just kind of whizzed by me, and like I feel like there's all different things that we're noticing.
Yeah,
that,
I think
like,
it's
the others aren't catching. So like it's really cool seeing like what each of us has picked out, like, and what's kind of caught our attention.
Yeah, and I think as it moves forward and as we see the season, I think, take shape and come to an end, it's going to be interesting looking back, just like when you like reread the comic and see everything that's there.
Like, all these other.
But
so then the next scene is the back to Angela
and her fella.
Yeah.
Just, I was like, it got to it. I was like, it was like HBO. I was like, it took almost the end of the episode,
right?
But I knew I was going to see somebody banging before this episode was finished.
That, which is probably like the only like semi criticism that I have of the episode is like, was it necessary? Like, it didn't really serve any purpose for them to have a sex scene there, other than it felt a little bit like it's HBO, so they have to do it.
I mean, we get a sex scene in the comics, too.
Yeah, we get
a sex scene, and then we get an attempt at a sex scene in the comics.
Yeah.
So I mean, it didn't feel unnatural, and I do think it kind of painted a picture of like, because like they also like they were trying to be quiet, like they were trying not to wake the kids up, and she even said like I'm almost there, like let's just finish. And it's like, no, it's gonna wake the kids up. So like we kind of get this glimpse like between her secret life and like the life that everyone thinks she leads. Like she probably doesn't get a lot of time for moments like this with her husband.
Yeah.
And even the dinner they had like was with her boss. So like I mean we've not gotten a lot of glimpse. Like we've seen her with like the career day thing with one of her sons at school. And then, like, when she comes home briefly, like, long enough to drop him off, and then ask her husband to pick up the kid, 'cause she gets a little bighorn call. So, like, I think it does something to kind of paint the picture for the timeline, the pressure, the stresses that she's under, and how, like, little time she actually has for a physical relationship with her husband.
Yeah. And the scene itself...
I thought it was tasteful.
Yeah, it was a lot more tasteful than I would have expected from an HBO series.
Yeah,
when you
didn't
compare
have
it to like,
Aidan Gillen monologuing in the background, so that was a huge plus. Talking about ladders or whatever. I was like, can I just see one sex scene in the show without ladders or philosophy or somebody making fun of poor Varys? We get it. He's a eunuch. Think of some new jokes, Tyrion.
So something I don't think we pointed out yet. The kids. So both Angela and Cal are very much African American,
but
both of the kids are pretty white, like
white or mixed.
Yeah.
I think that's going to be tied to us learning more about the White Knight, because part of me feels like she had a life before this family.
Oh.
Like very likely with another family.
But wouldn't these kids be old? I don't remember what the timeline was, but wouldn't these kids be older than that though?
No, I think that was
Not
just a few years ago.
So
probably
the White
3
Knight
years
was a few
ago.
years ago. So what I'm thinking
it's probably tied to the cavalry.
So yeah, I'm thinking probably is she was married before Cal, and because the White Knight, she mentions they went after like family members of cops too.
Yeah.
So realistically, she probably lost her first husband during that. Because also, like she talked about being a cop, she might not have been a detective at that point. Like she might have been a beat cop, which might also have been the reason that she got bumped up to detective, so that she would be in a position to kind of operate on a more discreet level and like kind of go after. Because the White Knight was tied to the truce, essentially, I think. Because that's around the time when they mentioned that there was peace established with like the 7th Cavalry, and there hadn't been any incidents since. So that's what I think that's what... Because I noticed that too, and I was like, I bet she was married beforehand, and something happened to that husband.
So then she gets a phone call, a mysterious phone call,
Yep.
asking her name, and if her father was Marcus Abar, tells her to go to the big oak tree on Roland Hill without a mask.
Yeah. She knows who she is.
So I don't think the reference to Marcus Abar is an accident.
No.
That seems
No,
like that
there's
is
no way.
very much like
They
really important, but
Like-
very understated in that moment.
Yeah, I think, as far as like I'm concerned, it seems to be hinting at that she's a descendant maybe of that little girl we see at
That's
the
what
beginning.
I was thinking. Because timeline wise, like we said, she's not old enough to have been that baby that he saves in the beginning. But she's at 100% old enough to be the daughter of that girl, for sure. So, and my guess is that probably that dude and the girl found a family together and essentially were raised as brother and sister, most likely.
Yeah, but she gets the call. She gets the shotgun out of the headboard.
Yeah.
Which,
Yeah.
man, how would you like to be just sleeping, minding your own business, and then you readjust, and suddenly a shotgun falls on your
Bam.
head?
Well, it's very deliberate too, the way she does it.
Oh, she was ready.
It's not like even like she just goes into like training mode, like she's been prepared for it.
Yeah.
Which I mean, since the White Knight, she probably very much has been. And that's the other thing too, is like then she hands Cal a pistol. He doesn't even question it.
No.
Like he knows that like this was a possibility, which makes me wonder if he knows like how much he knows about what she does, if anything. Because like he saw the little bighorn thing, so like obviously he knows she's being paid for something, and he probably assumes it's not bakery work related.
Yeah.
So like I'm really curious just to how much of her alter ego he is aware of, if anything.
Yeah,
at all.
absolutely.
Yeah. I think I mean, based on Charlie Sutton's wife, she
She
knew.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, so
feel like there's
family
no
it makes sense.
limitations
It's just
there.
people outside of it. So yeah, that makes sense then.
So she tells him anybody that's not her to just kill on sight.
Yeah.
Oh, jeez. All right, so then she goes to the place. She pulls up. There's car lights.
She tells him turn it off or he's dead.
Yeah, she's not messing around.
Yeah, like she just like pops out like just like shotgun resting on the door.
It's got
Which
one
is
of those
just a
super bright
badass shot.
flashlights.
And then we see the guy from the wheelchair
Yeah.
from the bakery earlier, played by Louis Gossett Jr.
With the
What is-
sign,
yeah.
we didn't mention the sign at the beginning.
Oh
It says,
yeah,
watch
the
over this
watch
boy.
over this boy. Yeah, that little handbill that he
yeah.
held on to. So, and then of course, unfortunately, we see Chief Crawford hanged, dead from the tree.
Yeah, missing one shoe.
Yeah, missing. Yeah, which is, I feel like there's no way that's not some kind of reference to some imagery. Probably lynching imagery,
Yeah.
most likely. And then of course we see the shot of the badge on the ground, and then that blood drop.
The
hit.
blood drop.
The
Just like
iconic
the
blood
smiley
drop.
face button.
With the like exact same shape of, of
Yeah,
the drop
yeah.
of blood that we see. You see it throughout the comic multiple times
Yep.
in various.
A
You just find a
raindrop,
new one every time
blood
you read it.
smear,
Yeah.
Mustard from a sandwich.
Yep.
Yeah.
So in the comic, is that used as kind of a punctuation to what's happening in those moments?
It's more just it's more of a recurring visual motif
Yeah.
than anything, which more does a lot.
There's a
Especially
few
in
of them.
Watchmen, and in Killing Joke as well. That pops up a lot, even though it's two different artists. I think. Yeah, it's two different artists, but like kind of those like visual transitions and stuff.
Yeah, there's
Those
those
are-
sprinkled throughout, as well as like a juxtaposition of like something is framed a certain way, and then you cut to a different scene entirely, but it's
similar framing.
yes, and it's like this
yeah.
perfect transition.
Yeah.
So
And again, yeah, just the cinematography, the way shots are framed in this,
Oh yeah.
so good. And then, of course, we find out that this guy can, in fact, lift 200 pounds.
Apparently, yes.
Or so he says.
Yeah. It's just
He also says he's
unfortunate
how
that-
old?
He's over. Well, I think it's in the like the trailer for the
For the
upcoming
for the next
episode.
episode,
that
yeah.
he's over 100 years old, which
Yeah, it's got to be
has to
huge
jive
by,
with that. Yeah.
like, conservative estimate. He was probably 7 or 8 in the beginning. So,
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, so I took that the blood drip to kind of be a all right. This is what this whole episode's been culminating to.
yeah.
And then this blood drip is like, this is what this is going to circle around. The whole story is going to circle around. Basically, Crawford gets hung. You've got it credits him as Will Reeves, although I don't think we ever get his.
Oh, interesting.
We don't get his name in the episode at all. But
No,
Louis
I don't
Gossett
think so.
Jr.'s character sitting there, like everything just seemed to be like bookended for the episode there, and like, all right, now here we go. Next episode's just gonna crack stuff wide open.
Oh, yeah. But, I mean, I mean, that's a hell of a first episode cliffhanger.
Yeah.
Like, I mean, we... pretty much up until he's driving down that road, we're set up to think that Crawford's probably going to be around
Yeah.
for a while. And, like, even though part of me was hoping, like, even after, like, his tires went out, I was like, all right, maybe they're just going to take him to, like, get her attention or something. And then, like, as soon as I see him from the trailer, I was like, all right, no, okay, Don Johnson's out, except maybe in flashbacks, which is a very real possibility for future episodes.
Yeah.
Is that a lot of stuff will probably be revealed in hindsight, much like it was in the comic.
I think so. Based on IMDb, he's credited for all 9 episodes.
Oh, well, there you go.
So I think he's very much. I mean, he's kind of like the comedian of this series. They
where he
frame
pops
it that
out even
way.
though he's killed in the first
And
moments of the comic.
His blood is the one that's drips, and
Yeah.
we're probably going to be seeing his funeral in the next episode, similar to how issue 2 is the comedian's funeral, and we're probably going to see some flashbacks, maybe some flashbacks to the White Knight. And
Yeah. I'm definitely excited for that, and because I mean, I think we can all agree the 7th Cavalry is obviously one of the antagonists of the series, but like the cops, even though Angela is one of them, like they're also operating as vigilantes, which is in itself like there's a question, and it even harkens back to that Bass Reeves quote.
Yes.
Bass Reeves quote at the beginning of like let the law have its day or whatever, not mob justice. So like, is it going to be tied to that?
Yeah, trust in the law. There will be no mob justice today.
Yes. So it'll be real interesting to kind of see what compromises have most likely been made on behalf of law enforcement to arrive where they are currently, and like what corners that means have been cut, what kind of like dealings there may have been with Crawford in the past, like any number of things, like because I don't think that Will Reeves is going to be our villain.
Yeah,
but he straight up murdered somebody. So like, which I feel like would not have been done without really good reason. So
yeah,
or it might not have been, because again, moral ambiguity is a big trademark of this series.
Yeah.
So,
but he calls Angela, like he doesn't. This isn't like a big thing. He didn't send it to the news or anything like that. He called Angela specifically. Which I feel like the next episode's got to open up with some sort of conversation between them. But maybe not. I don't know. I'm like,
or maybe even a glimpse into her past and like and exploring what connection, if any, there is, which there obviously has to be.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So yeah,
I'm on board.
All that to come. We'll see.
Yeah. Oh, the one other thing we completely missed, the nice little touch. There's when she goes to the bakery, there's the guy walking by with the picket sign, says the future is bright instead of the end is nigh.
Yeah.
It's like, there's a nice little touch there.
Yep.
Just again, just all these like little kind of subtle nods to the original comic.
Yeah. No, that's a nod to it in multiple ways, a nod to like Rorschach's side and
But also
like
that
Veidt's,
perspective. And how things have
millennium,
shifted.
yeah, his wanting to change the view to like optimism and the future.
Yeah.
So with the future in mind, we'll all come back next week to discuss episode 2.
Yeah.
So it was a real pleasure having you guys here.
It's a real pleasure being here.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
And you can reach us at whowatchespodcast@gmail.com. You can find us on Twitter at whowatchespod and Facebook Who Watches Podcast.
Send us all your email questions if you want to hear more unrelated pop culture theories from me about the works of Shane Black or whoever else.
What other celebrity music videos are out there?
Oh man, there's so many. You put me on the spot and I'm blanking. Mary Elizabeth Winstead put out an album several years ago of almost jazz type songs. It's actually very good. Her and Dan the Automator released it together, so it's not bad.
Yeah. You got Bruno.
What's that?
All of a sudden you got Bruno.
Oh yeah. Bruce Willis. I actually own The Return of Bruno on vinyl. For what it is, not a terrible album. It's dad rock, so I mean it's fine for what it is, and also it's October, so I've been listening to Dawkins' theme song to Nightmare on Elm Street 3: Dream Warriors on a daily basis. So there's all your non-Watchmen related recommendations from me, Dustin Meadows.
Thank you. So that is the premiere episode for Who Watches this week. We will see everyone next week for the next episode of HBO's Watchmen. Thank you and good night.
Quis custodiet ipsos custodes?